Welcome to the Transform Africa Summit out of Kigali, Rwanda. This is a 2015 edition under the theme of advancing digital innovation in Africa. We're set to have a very important conversation regarding the future of not just East Africa, but Africa as far as innovation is concerned. And joining me is my very able panel. Starting from my furthest right is Mr. Houlin Zhao. He's a Secretary General for the International Telecommunication Union. Also on my panel, the only lady in the panel, Cynthia Gordon. She is the Executive Vice President for Millicom Africa. Also, last but certainly not least, Honorable Jean Philbert Nsengimana, Youth and ICT Minister for the Government of Rwanda. I hope I got your name right.
Absolutely.
French is not my first language. Gentlemen and lady, thank you for making time on the sidelines of this very important conversation in Africa to speak to CNBC Africa. I'd like to start this conversation with, from the SecGen, give us a sense of the climate of where innovation and ICT is in Africa currently.
Yeah, innovation is very important. You know that the ITU created 1865, 150 years ago. We started with innovation of new technologies, with telegraph, then with telephone, data, satellite. And today we enjoy internet and mobile. And for me, you know, the innovation is very, very important to expand the power of new technologies to reach everybody. Now, here you have also noted that in the past, innovation coming from big companies. But today, in my opinion, innovation can come from small, medium-sized entrepreneurs from everywhere. For example, in Africa, we have innovation of e-banking, e-money. That is from Africa. And Africa know how can use new technologies to change their life, and then the new ideas from our young entrepreneurs from Africa will help us a lot to reach our people in the continent. So innovation absolutely is very important.
Madam Gordon, you've been involved in funding innovation from the perspective of someone who puts money or writes check to these organizations. What's your sense of where we are?
So in Africa, under the Tigo brand, we operate in 6 countries and we've got about 28 million customers. And our sense very much is that the starting point is access, very simply, in terms of driving innovation. And we're very proud that not only have we got 3G networks across all of those 6 countries, but in the last 2 weeks, we have launched for the first time, and we are the only mobile operator doing this, we have launched 4G in Tanzania and also in Rwanda. So we think the upgrading of those networks and the opportunities they provide to customers will be a real spur to innovation in those markets.
Honorable Minister, let me just bring you in this conversation. Obviously, Rwanda has been documented as a fairly advanced country in the African continent as far as innovation goes. Give us a sense of the climate of innovation and ICT.
Well, innovation is an ecosystem, so it's a space that has, it's like a puzzle that has many pieces. So the first piece and the central one is about education. The second one is about innovators being able to have confidence in themselves, being able to match the needs and the issues and the challenges that the communities in which they live and of course beyond are confronted with, and having the skills to bring technology to solve those challenges. Innovation is about entrepreneurship as well. It has to lead to some form of wealth creation. So at that point, funding becomes important. So it's also coming up. So when you bring all those pieces together, you start building an ecosystem that can start small, but then progressively grow. You've had this dream of, you know, creating the next Facebook or the next Amazon from Africa.
Or the next M-Pesa.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So M-Pesa is doing exactly like that. So I think that the sense that Africa is the cradle of innovation when it comes to these basic technologies, being able to meet the challenge of sustainable development in the continent is possible. And Smart Africa is precisely about that. It's precisely the promise of Smart Africa is to usher Africa into the digital era.
Right.
And this will happen when governments and the people start realizing that ICT needs to be at the center. It's just not simply a tool. It will happen when people have access. That is paramount. It will happen when governments start adopting technology. We are not going to expect that other people do it when governments are not doing it. So leading by example.
Right.
It will happen when the private sector invests. We need money to build networks. We need money to get devices into people's hands to do content and so on. And finally, it will only happen when everyone is included. When women are included, when youth are included.
Right.
And in everything we do, we also need to think about the environment.
Gentlemen and lady, this conversation about ICT is obviously coming at a good time, but there are critics who will say we should have had this conversation 10 years ago, especially in Africa. Probably start with Madam Cynthia Gordon. What is your answer to this? Because there are people who are saying this conversation should have been had 10 years ago. Africa should be meeting and putting the monies in ICT 10 years ago.
I think undoubtedly that would have been very helpful, but I think what inspires us at Tigo is that we're having that conversation now, and it is really happening. There is this new generation of very creative, connected youth who are really driving innovation, and I would be very positive about the future. You brought up the point about mobile financial services, which is a great innovation. Africa is out really leading that. The GSMA did a study of around the world, where are there implementations of mobile financial services that have scaled, so have more than 1 million customers. And I'm very proud to say at least 2 of those are in Africa, with Tigo Paysa in Tanzania and Tigo Paysa in Rwanda. In these countries, they are really leading innovation in that area.
Interesting. Yes.
Yes, I think that such a dialogue actually was happened 10 years ago as well.
Exactly.
You know, for example, 2004,
Right.
when we had our ITU Telecom Africa event in Cairo, and all Africa ministers come together and announce that they like to see the ICT play important roles to change Africa, and like to see, you know, that the telephone penetrations be quickly changed from 4% at the year of 2004.
Right.
To 10% by the year of 2010. And for them, at that moment, they already think the big role of ICT. They also thought about the big changes by ICT changes, by telecom changes.
Right.
However, their ambitious goal to reach 10% by the end of 2010 was much, much faster, you know, made. And then by the year of 2010, we already saw the average telephone penetrations. I think that is already almost 30%, 40%.
Right.
In many developing countries, in many least developed countries, this goal to reach 10% by 2010 is already passed earlier than 20.
Right.
So that kind of discussions, that kind of you know, strategic planning 10 years ago helped us a lot to see today's Africa is most dynamic continent in the world, and also, you know, Africa show very strong development, and according to ITU statistics, is also the fastest changing continent as far as the continent is concerned over the last decade.
Right.
So we are very pleased to see that Africa's leaders, African people, realize that very quite important to have ICT telecom development to facilitate all the socio-economic development.
Right.
And they reached the goals. They bypassed the goals. And today they set up new goals. And with this Transform Africa, we see some new goals. And that goals will also, again, help us to eliminate the digital divide between our Africa continent and the rest of the world.
Right.
We already see some areas, Africa is even doing better than the other continent.
Right. Honorable Minister, I'd like to bring you in on this because, like what the Secretary has said, yes, this conversation started a while ago, as early as 2004, but we've seen a lot of excitement now. From where you sit in government, what do you think is holding back not just Rwanda, but other emerging economies from this promise of Smart Africa?
You know, the discussion has been happening, as the Secretary General says, but I would like to add that it has also been evolving. We're not talking about the same things that we used to talk about 10 years ago. Right. At that time, the focus was very much on connectivity. A bit later, it was very much on broadband. Those issues are still much relevant. That's why access remains an important topic even right now.
Right.
But then, when you switch from connect to transform, that's where you find that you are just not connecting. We are thinking about the impact,
right,
economic impact, social impact that these technologies are making on people's lives and are able to make on people's lives. It's interesting that people keep missing predictions because the way our brain works linearly.
Right.
But these technologies, they grow exponentially. So when you draw a line, you know, from 2010 to 2014, you see where the line is going. You see that by 2010, it will hit 10% from 4%.
Right.
But these technologies have been doubling every year since 2006, at least in Rwanda,
right,
when we hosted the first Connect Africa Summit. Rwanda was at 2% of mobile phone penetration.
Right.
The next year was 4, and then 8, then 16, then 32, then 60.
Right.
So these technologies, whether broadband, mobile, Internet of Things,
right,
social media, they grow exponentially. And what people are missing and what we are trying to bring to this conversation is let's harness the power of these technologies. They are not linear, they're exponential. But unless you are prepared,
right,
you are not going to capture
right,
that advantage.
Let's talk about the financial impact because it all goes down to the money when you talk about this. And you brought in a very important point about access. Across sub-Saharan Africa, we've seen significant improvement in terms of access from Kenya to Rwanda, across Nigeria, South Africa. There's a lot of investment that has gone. We've seen CCOMs that came in and everyone got connected. But have we leveraged, Cynthia, have we leveraged from the investment we've put in terms of connectivity in Africa?
I think that's a very good question, and speaking as Millicom, we have a very simple business model, and one of the things that we need is a very transparent, rational and predictable framework to invest for the long term, because if you're investing in access infrastructure, then you're investing for 10 plus years.
Right.
So we want to work with governments who have a clear vision about what is their broadband strategy and act coherently with that. And I think the Rwanda government very clearly has that strategy and has been very foresightful in how they've implemented. In some other markets, we've seen governments who've imposed sales taxes on devices up to 30% plus. That for us is not coherent. That isn't going to help those countries see all the benefits that increased broadband penetration can deliver in terms of GDP growth.
Right.
So I would really encourage every government to create that broadband strategy and really think about the short-term trade-offs versus the long-term investments that will really catalyze their GDP growth.
Right. Before I bring in the section on this, Minister, I'd like to get a feel from the Rwandan experience. There's obviously, just like many other African countries, a lot of investment that has gone in not just access to ensure that people have access to internet and are connected. Do you feel as a country that you're getting a return on your investment?
Absolutely, there is no doubt about that, because and it's not only access we have invested in to be able to get that return on investment. You also need simultaneously to invest in education.
Right.
You need to invest in a conducive environment that keep promoting investment. So the return on investment is tangible. Economical, first of all, we know, and I can prove with numbers that the formula according to which 10% increase in broadband penetration leads to 1.2 to 1.5% GDP growth. Now, look at our GDP. 1% of our GDP is huge. It's more than anything that we have invested. So that formula works. When I was looking at the number, and it's something that we have started tracking in collaboration with the Central Bank, with the National Institute of Statistics, we found that it is true, it works. Secondly, we look at investments and job creation. The number of jobs that these new technologies have allowed to create. Whether you talk about mobile money, all these agents. The other day I was in the northern province. I met a girl who's just stopped studies at primary school. She sells Tigo Cash, in fact.
Fantastic.
And she told us that she's making something like 300,000 Rwandan francs per month. That's a salary of a fresh master's owner in Rwanda.
Right.
So jobs have been created, the economy is growing, education is being transformed, lives are being saved. Now, how much money do you attach to a life? Somebody who called an ambulance, a mother in labor who was able to get on an ambulance and get delivery assistance.
Right.
Yeah, it's priceless. So for us, the technologies are working, and there has never been any doubt.
Right.
From the moment His Excellency President Paul Kagame defined ICT as one of the central pillars of our development back in 2000 for the Vision 2020. At that time, it sounded very much counterintuitive, and it was competing with so many urgent priorities. At that time, we were even struggling to put food at the table, you know, of every family. But we had to make, you know, I think sacrifices for the long term.
Right.
So that trade-off between the short term and the long term is what countries, you know, policies, broadband policies need to strike right.
Right. You've just brought in policy, and that's an issue that I wanted Secretary Zhao to address. Do you feel like we have adequate policy harmonization to ensure that countries such as Rwanda or Kenya that are putting a lot of money in this are actually getting a return on investment? Because it's not just the governments, there's a lot of private sector players. Do we have adequate rules to ensure that they're actually benefiting from the sort of investments they put before we even get to transformation in just connectivity and access?
Yeah, as you might have noted, the telecom business was government business before 1997.
Right.
And when WTO, you know, made a decision to put this service as a service, market service, so we start to liberalize this market. And today, I think that I'm very pleased to know that worldwide, the telecom is mainly considered as a market business, not anymore government monopolized business. To have this good business as a market business, we need a good policy. And also very pleased to know that the many countries established independent telecom regulatory authority try to facilitate the market development. Yes. So as far as the policy is concerned, ITU working with our members to facilitate the good policies, to encourage investment in this business, and encourage market competitions, encourage the end users, benefit. All this, we work very hard with our members to facilitate. But let me just give you my quick observations. So today we enjoy this telecom development, ICT development in the environment. We all appreciate it very much. That is a good result of this collective work together. Right. But here I see another problem here. For ICT and telecom business, definitely I agree with Minister, with my private sector representatives here, that is really profit-making business, and it's sustainable. But that is with some conditions, where we look at the actual situation today among 7.3 billion population. Almost 7.2 billion mobile phone penetrations, subscriptions, and 3.2 billion internet users. But if you look at these internet users, 3.2 billion online, the other 4 billion is not online yet.
Right.
Why is not? That is if you look at the population, most of them live in the poor area, in the remote area. And here is less profit-making area.
Right.
And the industry may not show high interest to go there. And the other investors may not also show high interest to go there neither.
Right.
The government sometimes
are there incentives to encourage people like
we encourage new
areas?
business models.
Right.
We encourage new innovations to change from the current technologies to more affordable to connect the people not connected yet.
Right.
And I also noted that some companies even put their own money, I mean the public money,
Yes.
for example, to put mobile phone towers in the villages where industry don't want to go.
Right.
They said we created this, we set up these towers, and offer this to you free of charge, and you come to provide service. But I found the industry still not want to go, because after the tower set up free of charge, still they have to put the services, to put equipment, to put people there. And there, if there's no profit for some time, the manager will be sacked by the boss. So that's the second time I go there.
Right.
So these kind of things, we need good policies to encourage public-private sector to go to those areas.
Right.
We also have to create a better environment to allow, to encourage public-private investment to these areas.
Right.
So this is something, you know, we unless we bring these people connected, the world will not be really harmonized.
Mm-hmm.
So to you know, have harmonized policies, approaches at the global level, I think is absolutely important. We are working on this. But
right.
I should also remind you another thing. That is my worries, that ICT telecom is profit-making business.
Yes.
It's not always. And it's therefore cause a lot of troubles. For example, our operators like Tigo, they need to have more money to invest for new technology from 3G to 4G. They just announced 4G yesterday. And then next waiting for them is 5G. They need money to invest the new infrastructure with new technologies.
Right.
But the competition among themselves, even in Rwanda, Tigo is not guaranteed they will always win.
Right.
They have to work very hard to gain the confidence from users. In addition, you know, as we noted that you know, ICT telecom is part of contributing to our financial system.
Yes.
And that means they have to take their public responsibility to pay the taxes. And the industry want to have a low price, lower tax. That is all logic.
Right.
But even you have low tax, they have another problems, that another newcomers may come to use their infrastructure to do something, you know,
right.
In their interest. They may not feel comfortable. So this kind of industry, you know,
some of this is not entirely up to regulation. There's a lot of role that governments have to play in ensuring this.
Absolutely, government we have to pay.
Let me just bring in Cynthia, because he mentioned a very important issue that we've seen in most African countries. Why aren't private sector players willing to share infrastructure, for example? Because that was a big debate in Nairobi.
Yes.
Why, for example, Airtel and Vodafone will not be willing to do that. And are there other incentives other than just saying we'll give you a bit of a tax break for you to set up in rural areas? Because, like he said, these people really need connectivity.
Well, I can only speak for Millicom, and we're very positive about infrastructure sharing. From our perspective, $1 spent goes further, you know, twice as far at least, if we can share. So we would really like the governments, the regulator, to encourage operators to come together. I think in terms of connecting the final billion that you talked about, I think the most profound thing we can do is sharing the infrastructure. So the more we can encourage people to do that, the better.
Are there structures or systems that can be placed by, say, the ITU or regional communication bodies to ensure that this is easier? Because certainly private sector like yourself have a lot of valid reservations why they would not want to share.
Yeah, I mean, there are license conditions that the regulator can put in place that we encourage and to some extent mandate sharing. And certainly we're very positive to take every opportunity to talk to our counterparts and see where we can share. And that's a discussion that we're driving country by country with our fellow colleagues. So we believe in terms of developing this ecosystem, we need to act together. And I would pick up that it's not just about other mobile operators, it's the whole ecosystem. And a very practical example is in Tanzania, Tigo Tanzania launched Facebook in Swahili. That had a fundamental impact in terms of take-up of data services, because people finally had content in their home language.
Right.
A very simple example.
Which obviously deepened access.
Exactly, a very simple example, but something that we need to work very hard with our counterparts in the whole ecosystem to bring to customers.
Before we take a break, I'd like to hear from the Rwandan experience. How do you encourage players in this space, Tigo for example, to ensure that they get to provide connectivity and access to the rural areas that may not be as profitable as, say, in the city of Kigali?
Well, in Rwanda it's very clear and very simple. It's mandated by regulation. It's something that makes just plain business sense. So when the market structure is right, normally these are things that should happen by themselves. But we are a country in a hurry. Something when we believe profoundly something is right, we just go go straight to the goal, and we make a regulation.
Right.
And it has worked for us. And now we've seen at the beginning that normally the biggest players, they don't want to share because they already have what they want.
Yes.
But then it doesn't work for the economy in general. Today, it's mandated, and we started in a situation where everyone was running the infrastructure, but now they even, tower companies have come and take over all these towers. It's not the core business of a telecom operator to run towers, to be struggling with issues of energy and heating and whatever, cooling. So, and innovation, as Secretary General says, is going to force people to go in the right direction. Innovation in this sense of providing access, for instance, we are having new technologies that can allow to serve those underserved population at a very low cost. Green technologies, solar-powered telecom towers, these balloons, low-orbit satellites. I think there are so many options that are going to make the space of access not relevant anymore for competition. And when competition shifts from owning infrastructure and it goes to providing better customer experience, we are moving into the right direction. So there is a mix of market pressure, market incentives, with regulation targeted towards driving the market in the right direction.
Secretary General, I'd like you to have the final word regarding
how I just want to add my comment.
Change this?
For this, resources sharing, I think that it's also for the interest of industry themselves, and also for our country as well, because it is waste of resources. And I'm very pleased to know that this kind of development already started, 10 years ago, even earlier. For example, from Germany, when after the auction of 3G license, they found that it's a very heavy burden for each one to establish their own tower. So they asked them to share the tower resources, and they cut the total infrastructure investment by 1/3. So it's quite enormous. And now we just heard from our minister that in Rwanda you already have one company, tower company, to take care of all this. China is the same thing. They established tower company to take care of all the towers. That is one thing. But I also like to appreciate another model in Rwanda. Yesterday, we had the Tigo announce 4G together with Korea Telecom. And Korea Telecom offer the core network services. And these services now is shared by some others as well. So that is another way to see how can we reduce the cost, and then to make a best use of each competent companies to do the right work. So this kind of mode IT will work with our members to encourage members with new ideas to go further. In the end, it's good for the industry entirely. It's not only for one particular company or one particular area. I also noted a very ambitious goal by our Africa members, like one network area. In Europe is one single market. This, political initiatives from top, from the continent, from subcontinent, will help us to move to right direction. So I appreciate that very much.
We have to take a pause there because we're going into a break, but after the break we'll shift from access to transform Africa, as well as the ambitious project that is Smart Africa Initiative. But if you're watching us from across Africa, this is the Transform Africa Summit 2015 debate, and we're looking at the promise of Smart Africa Initiative in East Africa. I've been speaking to the Chief Secretary General for the International Telecommunications Union, Mr. Houlin Zhao. I've also been speaking to Madam Cynthia Gordon, who is the Executive VP for Millicom Africa, as well as Honorable Philbert Nsengimana, who is the Youth and ICT Minister in the government of Rwanda. We'll be having more of this after the break. Welcome back wherever you're watching us from the African continent. You're watching the Transform Africa Summit 2015 in Kigali, Rwanda, and this debate focuses on Transform Africa Initiative. On my panel today is Mr. Houlin Zhao. He is the Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union. Also, we have Madam Cynthia Gordon. She is the Executive VP for Millicom Africa. And Honorable Philbert Nsengimana. He is the Youth and ICT Minister in the Rwandan government. My name is Bonnie Tunya from CNBC Africa. Gentlemen and lady, we talked about access. Let's shift our focus a little bit, because at the end of the day, this is a money issue. It's about money. Otherwise, it will not be important to talk about it. I'd like to get a feel from Honorable Minister here. Rwanda has obviously been celebrated for doing a lot of things, ICT and a lot of advancement. There has been a lot of a strong vote of confidence from the private sector. Help us understand how the funding of this happens.
I must say that at the beginning of our 2020 vision, government has to make a lot of efforts to mobilize the market. I remember when we had to attract the first mobile operator, for instance, there was a skepticism as to whether this was a viable market, and the government had to put a bit of its skin in the game, and we had shares in that company.
Right.
But that's history now. Africa has proven it's a viable telecom market, it's a viable IT market, and the private sector is really leading investment. And in Rwanda in particular, we've been, I think, privileged, because I was looking at the numbers this morning. I found that over the last 5 years, the ICT sector attracted 45% of all foreign direct investments that came to Rwanda.
Right.
So that's more than what went into agriculture, mining, tourism, and other sectors combined. So which shows that ICT is acting as a magnet for investment. We set a goal for Smart Africa, which is to raise $300 billion over the next 5 years, by 2020. And that was based on the experience we had previously, because in 2007, we set up a goal to raise $50 billion in investment into ICT sector,
Right.
connecting Africa. When we met in the first Transform Africa edition in 2013, we did a proper evaluation. And we found that we had actually attracted in excess of $70 billion. Now, as we go into Transform Africa era, we thought that we could allow ourselves to be more ambitious, because mindsets have shifted. The demand is much more clearer. And we are now looking at things like smart cities, for instance. What does it take to build a new smart city or transform a city into a smart city? It's a huge investment. If you visit the booth, the exhibition area, you will see a number of demonstrations that show the promise of what life could be, a hyper-connected life could be. It's a lot of investment. Look at education. Africa should be very aggressive in terms of transforming its education sector,
Right.
build smart classrooms, for instance. It's a lot of money. But even connecting Africa, we are talking to investors from China. I was really pleasantly surprised. Connecting the whole of Africa with highway infrastructure, broadband, fiber optic, data centers, and so on. It's a $2.5 trillion business opportunity. So
we haven't even touched the tip of the
we
iceberg.
haven't even scratched the surface.
Right. Interesting. Let me bring in Madam Gordon, because you are in the heart of this. When we talk about 300 billion by 2020, how exactly do we get there?
So we talked a lot about investment in the infrastructure, so I'm going to set that aside. What I'd like to really pick up is what the Minister said about investing to help businesses and all sizes of business to digitise their business. And I think we very much see, as Tigo Business, looking across all of our markets, that the business segment is vastly underserved. And we are starting to move very strongly to change that. So, for example, working with the Rwandan government in terms of developing their e-government initiative. At the small, medium business sector, we're very much investing in rolling out B2B sales teams, digital change agents team that can go directly to business customers in their offices and talk to them about how they can digitize their business, how they can create websites, how they can get more from mobilizing their employees. But we think there's an opportunity across all of our markets to really develop those business market. And I'll give you one flagship example. In all of our 6 countries that we're in, Tanzania, DRC, Chad, Rwanda, we're investing in data centers, and we believe in most of the markets we have the best what's called tier 3 data centers already up and running. So a business customer can come to us and start to talk to us about how they can host their servers in our data centers in a very secure and controlled environment, so they have reliability and consistency to help them grow their business. So for us, a big part of that digital Africa transformation is B2B.
Before we bring in the SecGen on this, there's an issue we mentioned about the race against technological advancement that is obviously competing with investment. There is the goals that have been set, the 300 billion, but also there is different focus and priorities that a lot of the private sector that are responsible for this have to focus on. For example, the rollout of 4G technology in Africa. Different companies have taken different approaches and they've invested heavily. Do we get to a situation, Cynthia, where we have these goals competing with the overall goal of transforming Africa by investing in ICT?
I don't believe so. I mean, for us, we're a very innovative company, and that's why we're leading in terms of rolling out 4G. For us, it's more about how can we take that to a customer. And I'll give you another very practical example. We're rolling out more Tigo boutiques, more Tigo shops, and we're really trying to transform those shops into digital shops. So you can come into them and get trained how you can make the most from your smartphone, how you can mobilize your business. So I think it's not only what we're doing at the back end in terms of access infrastructure. I think the game is really changing to the experience and how we can help educate the customers to make the most of that access.
Right. SecGen, recently we had a lot of conversation about digital migration from across Africa. And a lot of the dates and the deadlines that were set originated from the ITU. And my concern is with the sort of planning that is happening, how does ITU align its mandates and goal to ensure that this growth we're talking about actually gets to happen and it's not impeded? Because there's a lot of noise, especially in different African markets, regarding, for example, digital migration. Yes, it was well-meaning, it was a good thing, but do we have an alignment of the policies and the goals that have been set?
Yeah, I think that ITU has worked with our members to set up strategic plans. Because you don't have a strategic plan, you don't have plans, you will not do anything good. So for ITU, we set up a Connected 2020 plan. Then by 2020, we put some tangible targets. For example, by 2020, we'd like to have 55% of households to be connected with broadband connection capabilities. Today, it's very low. It's very low. It's less than 10%. So to increase this globally, globally it's not that low. I mean that from Africa, it's less than 10%, and globally it's already almost 35 to 40%. So Africa is much lower, and to change this, criteria from this low level to 55% at over the average, which means Africa will have to do more. So that is very clear. And we ITU also work with our members to develop a regional initiative, regional plans to match the global plans. So we are working very hard with our regional members as well. And this Transform Africa is one of the platform we really evaluate, and we consider this absolutely important. That is the reason why Secretary General always come to Transform Africa. 2 years ago we were here, and we consider this is a very important opportunities to work together to promote Africa continent. And for me, this 300 billion seems to be very, very, very huge money. But as the minister just said, that compared with the consequences that could bring, it would be enormous. So for me, this 300 billion might be the minimum, not as the maximum. But the problem is whether we can get such money from where. I think that if you remember, from the first event we organized here is the Connect Africa 2007 in Kigali, we set up a goals to have 55 billion for the next 5 years. And at that moment, we do not have money in our pocket. We just consider this absolutely needed. We have to work hard to get it. And then at the end of the 5 years period, we found that we have reached not only 50, 55, but already reached more than 70 million. Because the industry found this good place to invest, so they come in with their own capitals, and the government also mobilizes some other resources. So this 300 with compared with 50 billion in a couple of years ago, as the Minister just mentioned, today's situation is quite different. At that moment, 2007, we're talking about connectivity, access. Today we are talking about smart. Now smart need more wide range of applications with more better environment to support the applications. So we need huge money. Now ITU is International Telecommunications Union. We are very proud. We celebrate our 150 years anniversary this year. It's one of the oldest United Nations specialized agency. We are much older than United Nations itself, because UN celebrates the 70s. We already 150 years.
Right.
And in the UN system, we have another financial institute at the agency like World Bank. They have money. But if we go them to ask them to give us money, they will tell us that for their budget, for the ICT's applications, is the total percentage may not more than 1.5% of the total budget. So everywhere they want to have this kind of investment from World Bank, they cannot do everything everywhere. But if we have a good environment, I believe this money will be.
The private sector still plays a big role in this.
No, the problem is we have to promote our images. Myself, as Secretary General of ITU, starting from the beginning of this year, I worked everywhere to promote the potentials of Africa continent. And here is very dynamic. It's profit-making area, and also that a lot of good stories. But even we loudly promoted this, not everybody heard these kind of voices. So we still have to find a way to increase our voices,
right?
To convince the industry to come, but also ask the others to notice this area.
Right.
Myself, I'm very pleased. I'd like to share with you that the global leader all realize that ICT is quite important. So at the UN General Assembly last month, they approved these Sustainable Development Goals. Among 17 goals, you will see some references to ICT, but everywhere we found that if you go further, for example, this morning, we had a breakfast meeting. Our representative from Prime Minister's Office of Rwanda mentioned that when we talk about eliminate poverty, and you go from the top, you don't find ICT that kind of relevant, but you go further down to the details, you find that ICT absolutely will become very, very powerful tools to help us to eliminate poverty.
So you have to share this
we have to
vision.
Yes,
with all the
we have to continue to work hard to voice this situation.
Right.
I'm very pleased that the global leaders, one after the other, they try to show their own interest to support ICT.
Right.
For example, 25th of September in New York, I was very surprisingly, very honorably invited by Her Excellency, the Chancellor of Germany, to join her at a dinner. She invited dozens of Africa presidents and prime ministers, only at this level, to have dinner with her. And she talked about cooperation between Germany and Africa. And she also focused on topic to use ICT as enablers to that is the reason why I was invited.
Right.
So that was absolutely a clear message to me. The global leaders like Madam Merkel also pay attention to the ICT development. That is a very good message for us. We have to continue.
That is very good, but let's talk about the bad. Honorable Minister, there are obvious challenges to this. This is a huge amount of money. It's a huge vision that has a lot of potential to transform Africa. What do you see as the biggest threats as we journey towards Transform Africa initiative?
Well, I'm not a negative person. I find myself very hard to think negatively because I look at the possibilities. Now, we know where we are starting from. I think if you call it a threat, then we are in the threat because we are starting from a low base, but we are moving very rapidly. So that's why I don't want to look at it as a threat.
Right.
Probably
what are the opportunities then? Oh, call them impediments. Right.
Well, I would say that Africa, we are still facing an energy challenge. Less than 30% of households connected to electricity is by no means a little challenge, and that makes actually investment into energy part and parcel of investment in ICT,
right.
Especially when we start talking about this solar power systems, you know, household, small grid, off-grid solutions. They are also, for me, they are part of the equation, when even part of the 300 billion,
right.
if you will. So, powering Africa is a big challenge, but it's a huge opportunity as well. Secondly, I look at things like doing business.
Right.
When you talk about attracting all those investments, we know that certain markets still face challenges in terms of being investment friendly, and it's an area where many African countries still need to improve. Third, I look at levels of education,
right.
The capacity, which goes with the demand. The demand side to be able to absorb those value-added, services. There is an issue of digital literacy that needs to be looked at as well. So the insufficient amount of relevant and available and localized content is remain a challenge. But the good thing about ICT is, challenges are the things that make us, wake up in the morning, pick up our pieces and go to work, because we know that solving a challenge means a lot to our economies, sometimes means lives to be saved.
Right.
So those are the challenge, but I think we have overcome the biggest and most daunting challenge,
right.
Which was the mindset challenge. When we talk about ICT being seen as irrelevant to the discourse of development, I think that is becoming something of the past. I'm not saying it is completely.
It will take some time, but
yeah,
there is.
But at least in Rwanda,
right.
My job is a lot easier because all my colleagues, whether we talk about finance, education, healthcare, public service, infrastructure, they get it.
Right.
And that's largely because of the leadership. So if there is one thing that I can say will change the equation, make a total difference, it is leadership.
Interesting. I'd like to bring in Cynthia Gordon to just give us your take on the whole journey to Smart Africa initiative. Then I'll come back to all of us for our closing comments.
I think the perspective I would add to what the gentlemen have said is to really focus on the people side of the challenge. We talked about local content. We think that's very important, but I think there are also some what I would call forgotten segments, and I particularly like to identify firstly the amount of people who still don't have a mobile phone. So very simply, we, Tigo, together with working with other operators, with governments, we need to look at how we can bring everyone into access. The other segment I would really focus on, and we talked about this yesterday, that we have a shared belief that the last billion that we bring into the internet, the vast majority will be women. Women are the change agents in families. If women are better off, the things that they invest in is the education of their children. So they create a very positive, virtuous circle. So we need to find a way through offering special services, and we've already very much started on this in terms of things like our Tigo Sugara service in Rwanda, is to find out how we can bring more women into the digital age earlier, and enable them with smartphones, get them working in our workforce as retail sales agents, etc. So please, let's not forget women. Let's focus on how many women we have connected to the internet, separately from those total figures we like to talk about.
I would like
to
add,
and then you give us your closing comments.
SME is a very important part of ICT business chain. And if they come to show their potentials, we help them to show their potentials here. Our situation will be completely different from we don't engage them. So I would like to add that one. Let me also share my colleague's opinion that the leadership is very important. The Rwanda president, Mr. Kagame, is a very, very smart leader in Africa. And he himself is championing for ICT to support Africa. And he himself was invited by ITU and the United Nations to chair our famous UN Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development. We started this commission from July year 2000, and since then he has never missed any single meeting. As a president of a country, he must be very busy. But even our commissioners, we have industry commissioners, ministers. From time to time, we get their excuse: we are very busy at home, I cannot come. As president of a country, he never missed our meeting twice a year since July 2000.
So it's about leadership.
Leadership. It's very important. That is the reason why I can see that Rwanda moving very fast. And Rwanda's model is also appreciated by your neighbors. And I met with the president of Ivory Coast. He himself told me that he admired Rwanda's achievement. I think that these kind of things will help country to develop. Will help country to improve. Will help the regions, the continent. So we need leaders of President Kagame and alike.
Right.
So this is quite important observation. Of course, we still have to work harder to reach everybody to come to our Africa continent. For example, the first time I brought with me this time here the Chinese bank, the senior representative from China's Export Import Bank. And I talked with her yesterday, and she was very pleased to come here. But before, she did not know that we have such kind of opportunity to talk about ICT development in Africa. And she will be very pleased if we present her with a good project. She is more than happy to help us with the financial arrangement.
So
that is our challenges.
From that side.
Our challenges to present good projects.
To sell this vision.
To sell our vision.
Right.
To sell our region.
Okay. Minister, your closing comments, and then we'll have the lady deservedly to wrap this for us. Closing comments.
Well, I think Transform Africa 2015 has been a big success, and we coming out of Kigali, I think there has to be a renewed commitment, a renewed determination to work the talk. I think we need to understand that the expectations on our leadership from the people are very high, and our job is to work tirelessly to meet those expectations. And it's something that no one alone can do. It has to be done by the government, the private sector, international organizations. All together, we will leverage these technologies to the greater benefit of our people in Africa.
Indeed. Take us home.
So very simply, from Tigo and I think from the rest of the panel, I think we have a duty, responsibility and pleasure to transform Africa, and I think together we can do it.
Yeah, I like your statement. I just add work together, we will be able to transform Africa.
Okay.
Right.
Yes.
Indeed. I dare not add anything more because we do not have enough time. But you've been watching the Transform Africa Summit 2015 debate hosted by CNBC Africa, and we've been looking at the journey to Smart Africa initiative. On my panel, I've had Secretary General to the International Telecommunications Union, Mr. Houlin Zhao. I've also had Madam Cynthia Gordon. She is the Exec VP for Millicom Africa, as well as Honorable Jean Philbert Nsengimana, who is the Youth and ICT Minister in the Rwandan government. My name is Boni Tunya, and this is CNBC Africa.